So right here, I'm going to go ahead. I've already typed out the definitions once again, but here are the 4 types, or at least the 4 types we're going to talk in this class of how to collect data. So one way you can collect data is through an experiment. An experiment always means you're imposing some sort of treatment on individuals. So it could be a drug treatment. It could be testing batteries. So I've seen an experiment where a student wanted to test how long batteries would last to see if batteries stored in a freezer would last longer than those stored at room temperature. So they put the batteries into 2 separate groups and so on. So that's imposing a treatment. There's the freezer treatment and the room temperature treatment. Observational study is pretty much the exact opposite of that. That's where you're just observing individuals and you don't want to control individuals or their environments. You're really trying to be hands-off. You're not putting treatments on them. You're trying to see them in their natural habitat. A survey is when you're investigating one or more characteristics of a population and you're asking every member of that sample one or more questions. So, I mean, you've probably seen surveys. I mean, I know you've seen surveys on like receipts. They'll ask you to fill out a survey. You're just asking a few questions, usually that people respond to. Last one is called a simulation. A simulation is where you take some model to reproduce conditions of a situation or process so that simulated outcomes closely match real-world outcomes. So example here would be a simulation. You'll see this on like computers. They'll simulate rolling a dice or flipping a coin, which you can just do on your own. You can literally physically flip a coin, but they have simulators that kind of simulate it to show what it would roughly look like in the real world if you actually did it physically. So we're just going to go ahead on this last part, just identify the method of data collection in the situation. So a researcher records whether people at a gas station use hand sanitizer. So you've got your 4 methods right here. Experiment means you're imposing a treatment. So the researcher is not making them use hand sanitizer. He's just watching to see whether or not they use hand sanitizer, which means it is an observational study. And there are no questions he's asking, or he or she, I should say. So that is why we just call that observational. Next one, a landscaper fertilizes 20 lawns with a regular fertilizer and 20 lawns with a new organic fertilizer. The landscaper then compares the lawns after 10 weeks and determines which fertilizer is better. So this one would be an example of an experiment. And that's because you are imposing some treatment. So the landscaper, the treatment that's being imposed is the 2 different fertilizers. So some lawns have the regular, some have the new organic fertilizer, and then the landscaper is then going to compare and see what happens after 10 weeks. Next one, so we've got a manager uses a computer program to predict how many defective products could be expected on a particular assembly line. So often when you're using a computer program, this is when you would call this a simulation. So they're using that computer program to predict if you see up here, predict a real world outcome. And it should actually closely match based on, they use a lot of statistics actually to make sure it kind of closely matches what typically happens to help them kind of predict in the real world. Last one, a dentist gives his patients a questionnaire about dental hygiene. So this would be a survey, and the doctor is just asking, if you're asking questions, like a set of questions, or I should say asking each patient a set of questions. Wow, my handwriting is so good. Then we would call that a survey. Okay, so that's an example. You can see an example of each one of those: observational study, experiment, simulation, and survey. And that's your lesson.